Magic players and collectors, welcome to the Land Library. I'm your librarian, and today I'm covering Bloomburrow. Bloomburrow released on August 2nd, 2024, and is a fairly unique set based in a plane where all the inhabitants are animals. It's set in a pretty standard fantasy setting, just like most of the rest of Magic, just with everything on a much smaller scale. The lands, understandably, follow this theme, mostly being villages and cities of the valley area, and the art especially shows off a lot of the large-scale foliage, not because the plants themselves are huge, just because the characters are very small. But that's enough intro, let's start looking at some of those wonderful lands. Firstly, the basic lands are the most obvious returning lands, being printed in like every set, but Bloomburrow does something very interesting with its basics. All of the basic lands and packs are full arts, with each having 4 different arts, one for each season. But the different arts do have their own rarities. Springs are the most common at a 40% chance, summers have a 30% chance, autumns have a 20% chance, and winters have a 10% chance. There's no mechanical difference between these prints, such as like the winters are not snowlands, it's purely cosmetic. But now let's take a look at all of the prints. So first up, we've got forest, and then mountain, and then swamp, and then island, and lastly plains. There's also a set of regular art basics, but these are not in packs, they are only available in the starter decks and the land pack inside of booster bundles. Next up, we've got Uncharted Haven. This is a pretty decent land for multicolored decks. The choice of mana that it produces gets more valuable the more colors you have to potentially compensate for something you're lacking. But this is just a returning land. It's not new. The only real new property is just the art and flavor text, both of which are very on theme. They're showing off the wild lands outside of Valley. Then we've got Fabled Passage. This is like a wild card fetch land. It can get any of the basics, and just like Uncharted Haven, it gets more valuable the more colors you run, for the same reason. The gorgeous art on this one depicts a passage through like a strawberry bush, or maybe like a hedge that has strawberries. Not entirely sure what it is, but it does look cool. There's also an extended art version available. And now onto an absolute classic, Command Tower. This absolute staple of Commander is not actually available in packs, it's just in the Commander decks. But it is new art, it's really fun art, showing off a little like wizard tower of the Batfolk high up in the trees. And then we've got another Commander deck exclusive, Exotic Orchard. This card is gorgeous. It's gotta be one of my favorite arts from like the Bloomburrow lands. The effect of Exotic Orchard can be a little wonky because it relies on your opponent's deck for like what mana it can produce, but it is kind of a fun card, and in Commander, when you're playing against multiple people with lots of colored land, it's not really an issue. And it can always pay for generic costs anyway. But yeah, just look at that gorgeous art. It's full of fruits, it's so colorful, it's just really great. In contrast, our next one is Swarmyard. This land is really dark and spooky with its regenerating effect and its art. It's also a Commander deck exclusive, and this is the last one with a new print. There's a bunch of other returning lands, but they're no different from previous prints other than the fact that they have the set symbol. The first of these, Blossoming Sands and Swiftwater Cliffs, are in the starter decks, and the rest are in the Commander decks. There's over 60 of them, and as much as I'd love explaining each one, since they're not unique, I don't really want to waste a ton of time going through all of them, so I'll just try to rapid fire them off. Going in alphabetical order, we've got Adakar Wastes, Barren Moor, Battlefield Forge, Bojuka Bog, Brushland, Canopy Vista, Cascade Bluffs, Castle Arvindale, Cinder Glade, Clifftop Retreat, Copperline Gorge, Evolving Wilds, Ferris Lake, Flooded Grove, Forgotten Cave, Game Trail, Glacial Fortress, Golgari Rot Farm, Grim Backwoods, Groll Turf, Haunted Mire, Hinterland Harbor, Jungle Hollow, Harpulson Forest, Llanowar Wastes, Mossfire Valley, Mosswort Bridge, Mystic Monastery, Necroblossom Snarl, Oran Reef the Vast Wood, Overflowing Basin, Path of Ancestry, Prairie Stream, Raging Ravine, Razor Verge Thicket, Reliquary Tower, Rootbound Crag, Rugged Prairie, Seachrome Coast, Seaside Citadel, Sheltered Thicket, Sheevan Reef, Skycloud Expanse, Sulphur Falls, Sungrass Prairie, Sunpetal Grove, Sunscorched Divide, Tainted Wood, Temple of Abandon, Temple of Enlightenment, Temple of Epiphany, Temple of Malady, Temple of Mystery, Temple of Plenty, and Temple of Triumph, Terramorphic Expanse, Thriving Bluff, Thriving Grove, Thriving Heath, Thriving Isle, Tranquil Thicket, Twilight Mire, Viridescent Bog, Wooded Ridgeline, Woodland Cemetery, and Yavimaya Coast. First off, for the new lands, we have the villages. There's a village in each color, and they all share a couple of effects and have their own effect that matches their own color's mechanics more. Starting with the green Oak Hollow Village, this can tap to produce a colorless, or tap to produce a green that can only be sent on casting a creature. All of the villages have these two options, just in their own respective color, so I'm not going to cover them on every single one, just this one. In addition, its unique effect is at the cost of a green, you can tap to add a 1/1 counter to all frogs, rabbits, raccoons, and squirrels that have entered your battlefield this turn. The red village, Rockface Village, for the cost of a red mana, you can tap to give haste and +1/+0 to a single target lizard, mouse, otter, or raccoon creature that you control. Interestingly, this also is at sorcery speed and is the only village that has this stipulation. Next up in black, we have the Mudflat Village. This village, for the cost of 1 black and 1 generic, you can tap and sacrifice to return a single target bat, lizard, rat, or squirrel to your hand from the graveyard. Moving on to blue, the Lilypad Village, for the cost of a blue, you can tap to surveil 2, although you have to have already played a bird, frog, otter, or rat this turn in order to use this. Last but not least, there's the White Lupin Flower Village. For the cost of a white and a generic, this village can tap and sacrifice to look at the top 6 cards of your library. You will reveal 1 bat, bird, mouse, or rabbit from them, put it in your hand, and then shuffle the rest, or all 6 if you revealed nothing, and put them on the bottom of your library. Moving on from the villages, there is the gorgeous city of Fountainport. Fountainport has quite a few options with its 4 effects, the first being a pretty typical effect for non-basic lands, tap for colorless. The second effect, at an additional cost of 2 generic and sacrificing a token, you can tap to draw a card. The third effect, with an additional cost of 3 generic and 1 life, you tap to create a 1/1 blue fish token. And the last effect, with an additional cost of 4 generic, taps to create a treasure token. Fountainport also boasts a really nice extended art version. But Fountainport isn't the only city, there's also my favorite land in this set, Three Tree City. I won't go too in-depth on Three Tree City, I'm making a whole separate video for that, but the basic rundown is that this legendary land is very powerful. It can of course tap for colorless, but it also has the effect that when it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. Then, for a cost of 2 generic, you tap to produce your choice of colored mana equal to the number of creatures you control of that chosen type. And not only does it have this powerful effect, but it has not 1, but 4 borderless arts. 1 for each of the seasons. But, unlike the seasonal basic lands, these do not have different rarities, they are all equally rare. The final new land is not a village or a city, or really a place where anyone lives at all, it's Hidden Grotto. And this, just like its other fellow Grotto cards, can tap for a colorless, or, for the cost of 1 generic, can tap to make a colored mana, essentially just exchanging one color for another. But, in addition, when it enters the battlefield, you surveil 1. Let me preface this real quick with that I'm no expert on the meta, just a person passionate about land, so my analysis of the meta might not be the most accurate, and is obviously subject to change when new cards release in the future. With that said, to my understanding, the lands in this set are doing very little to impact the meta. The unique effects of the villages are far too dependent on the Bloomburrow races to be effective outside of, like, drafting Bloomburrow. Without the unique effects, they're basically just a basic land, but worse, because their colored mana is restricted to only paying for creatures, and they're not as targetable by cards that search out land as basics are. Fountain Port is in a bit of a weird spot. It's not bad, but it's not that strong either. There's much better treasure token makers, and the fish token isn't really useful outside of Bloomburrow, but the extra draw is pretty good in any token-heavy deck, so to my knowledge, Fountain Port is mostly just seeing play in Pioneer, and I guess like Bloomburrow exclusive stuff. Hidden Grotto is pretty mid. It's easily on the same level as other Grotto cards, so like it's fine. It's perfectly fine to put in like a multicolor commander deck, but it's not really strong enough for standard. Fabled Passage, although this is a reprint, it does make it standard legal again, and it previously has seen high level play, but in the current meta, it's just considered too slow. It's a fetch land for anything, which is nice, but generally speaking, most meta decks aren't playing a lot of colors, so being able to get any color isn't really that good, and you might as well just run a normal fetch land to just play the basic untapped. So Fabled Passage, although not bad, just isn't really good enough for current meta. Uncharted Haven is in a similar place, where the versatility of choosing a color is fine, just not really that powerful. A monocolored deck literally has no use for this, and a dual color deck would also just rather use dual color lands. But a 3+ color deck could benefit from the choice, especially like in Commander, it's pretty decent. But once again, it's just not that strong in Standard. As much as I love Three Tree City, it's also not good in Standard. The fact that it's legendary means you're limited to 1, and it makes mana after you have creatures. It's directly trying to compete with things like Cavern of Souls, which it just can't keep up with. Cavern of Souls makes mana sooner and helps you play the creatures, and with the faster pace of Standard, that's just better. It also isn't legendary, so it's not restricted to 1, but in Commander, that isn't really an issue. Only having 1 copy doesn't matter at all because everything only has 1 copy. And with the slower pace, higher prevalence of tribal decks, it's way better in Commander. It's in fact very strong in Commander. On to the scores. For Standard relevance, 0 out of 5. This set is completely irrelevant in Standard. Everything in it is mediocre at best in Standard. For Commander relevance, 4 out of 5. It's got a pretty decent amount of like mid-level lands, and it has the absolute powerhouse of Three Tree City. But it only really has the 1, like the rest are pretty mid, so I can't give it full score. For theme, brilliant, 5 out of 5. This set goes hard on the theme. Everything in it, the mechanics, the art, flavor text, it doubles down and it does it well. For the art, 10 out of 10, amazing art. Those gorgeous borderless seasonal Three Tree Cities, amazing. All the full art basics, the cute little villages, exotic orchard, like this set has amazing art. It does so well. I love it. For the overall score, this is getting a 19 out of 25. A very solid score for a very solid set of lands. That is if you're a collector or a commander player, because this set is terrible in Standard, but great in Commander and looks amazing. That wraps up everything you need to know about the Bloomburrow lands, but if I missed something, or if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. If you've made it this far, why don't you go ahead and drop a like for turn and subscribe for more land-filled content. I'll be back soon with the next latest loadout when Duskborn House of Horror releases.